This is the new Fox Neo Live Valve rear shock. It comes in both an air and coil version, and we're going to dive deep into them right now. So Neo is the name that Fox gave to their new wireless communication protocol, which is what is being used on these rear shocks and the seat post. It's a new communication that is what they claim to be 100 times faster than Bluetooth and 20 times faster than any other communication in the mountain bike space right now. And it operates at 2.4 gigahertz. So it's really, very fast. And, when it comes to a seat post, it's kind of like, okay, fast communication for a seat post isn't too important. But when it comes to electronically controlled damping of a rear shock, it's incredibly important. So that's, a huge advancement that they've made, and kind of why this shock took a while to get to the market, whereas some of their competitors have already had electronic suspension for the last couple of years. So the new line of Neo shocks are available both in an air and coil configuration. They're actually based off of the architecture of the DHX and the FloatX. And your first question you may ask is, why wasn't this technology adapted to the DHX2 and the FloatX2, which are their two gravity-oriented rear shocks? And the answer for that is because Fox felt that this system was best designed for trail bikes. It's not something that's necessarily needs to be used for gravity orientation, but it's really something that's keeping your bike much more efficient while you're out on those long days getting after it on the trail bike. So that's why it's available in these two platforms. So another question you may have, knowing what RockShox is doing with their flight attendant, is will the Neo system be implemented on their forks as well? And the answer to that is no.
For a trail bike system, you don't need an electronically controlled fork damper, and in fact most riders don't want it. Again, with that speed thing kind of being the goal, like the system has to react fast enough, and no matter how fast you're reacting, if the fork is hitting a bump and then it's also reacting to that bump, there is no time delay there whatsoever. So you're going to feel something. In an XC application, that's probably acceptable because it's a trade-off and you're gaining efficiency, so it's worthwhile. But in in a trail or enduro or downhill format, that's not acceptable. So we have a sensor up here connected to whether it's like a GripX or a GripX2 damper that's like ultra sensitive. So you're reading the trail 100% down here unsprung, and you're sending that data to the shock controller fast enough that it can actually adjust the shock. So where like you hit a bump here, before the rear tire hits it, the shock has already adjusted to do the right thing for that. So that kind of gives you an idea of how fast things work.
So, one thing you might think about when looking at electronic shock is that, okay, this is overly complicated. It's gonna be very hard to service. What's cool about this shock is that it actually, again, it's based off of the same architecture as the FloatX, which I have right here. This one's not electronic, this one is. And if you look at the air cans side by side, you'll see that they are identical. So what that means is this air can is just a standard air can. You can pull it off, do a seal service like any other shock you would have. You can still fill volume spacers up here. All of the electronics that this shock has is all located up in the piggyback portion of this shock. So you can easily do your, 50-hour seal service if you want at home, 100-hour seal service, whatever it may be, which is great. Just because it's electronic doesn't mean it can't be serviced. So as any electronic suspension or electronic product, it has a battery. The average range for the rear shock is around 20 hours of riding. It's easy to remove, and it comes with a charger and everything you need to charge it at home. It's also the same exact battery that is on the transfer post. So if you have both of those on your bikes, you can interchange them. If one is losing power or goes dead while you're out on a ride, you can switch those out. If you are in a situation where the battery dies while you're out on a ride, you don't have to worry. Like when the battery's dead, it's just a shock. It doesn't seize up, it doesn't freeze or anything like that. It still works totally fine like a normal shock. So any of the external adjustments still work as well without it being powered. So yeah, no worries there. You're not going to be stranded for any reason. So an interesting kind of design of the shock is that it has a default firm mode. So that means basically the shock is always providing extra damping in the compression circuit And the way the shock works is you have these sensors that you install on your brake mount. So right by your brake caliper, you attach this. And when you look at that, it looks like it's for something to do with braking, and it actually has nothing to do with the brakes. They just need this sensor as close to the axle as possible, and that just happens to be an easy place to attach it, so that's where it lives. And basically these sensors being close to the axle, they, can pick up what the trail's doing instantaneously through the axles. And that's why this protocol that's, 100 times faster than Bluetooth, 200 or 20 times faster than competitors is so important, because it instantly breaks away from that firm mode as soon as your axles come into contact with any undulations in the trail. So it's an instantaneous reaction, and that speed is what, first of all, took them so long to get this shock to market, and also is what makes this shock so amazing. Again, people may say kind of late to the market on this, but there's a good reason for it. So let's talk about the external adjustments of the shock a little bit. So like all air shocks, there's a Schrader valve right here that you use to control the air pressure. Just like the normal FloatX, there is a single rebound control, which is just a knob here that you can spin. And then there's also a low speed compression knob on the outside here that you can use to adjust. If you're unfamiliar with low speed compression, the way I like to think about it is like if you're kind of G'ing out or pumping through stuff, the support your shock gives you there, that's low speed compression for the most part. So that's kind of, it's nice that they have that external adjustment there. And then what's new to this shock compared to a standard shock is this adjustment right here, which is called firm mode adjust. And this firm mode adjust is actually controlling the amount of dampening that the electronic system is providing. So you can basically crank this all the way up, which is going to give you the most platform while you're riding, while you're pedaling, while you're sprinting, while you're pumping. Or you can turn this all the way down, which is still going to give you a platform that's electronically controlled, that where the damping is changing, but it's not going to be to the same degree as what you would experience with it totally cranked up. While we were at a Fox event learning about these shocks, we got to talk to Remy Gavin, who's a professional enduro racer that rides for Rocky Mountain Bikes. He told us that he runs his firm just 2 clicks from the firmest mode. So he still runs it pretty firm, which really helps him generate and maintain speed while racing. But again, just because of how fast the protocol is, that shock is breaking away as soon as he gets into the rough stuff. So really cool thing, definitely something you can mess with when you have the shock and try out. But yeah, other than that, most of the adjustments are just what you would see on any other shock. So easy to set up, easy to tune. So if you're extra observant and you're into World Cup racing, you might have noticed the junior Asa Vermette this year. He's been winning almost every race. And you might have noticed that he's actually running one of these shocks on his downhill bike. He's running the coil version, as you see on this bike. And if you're even more of a nerd, you might notice he's not actually running the sensors on his brake calipers. The reason for this is that he's actually running it a little bit differently, where he's actually running a remote on his handlebar, which basically is he's using to help firm up the shock for the sprinting sections of races. So it's basically an aftermarket upgrade that's going to be available soon, where you can run a remote on your handlebar, which will stiffen up the shock, but it's not exactly acting in the dynamic way that the shock can perform while using the sensors as it's mainly designed to be used as.
The handlebar switch is extremely optional, mostly something that we're doing for like our downhill racers and enduro racers who it's like, you're coming into like that one sprint section and you just want to absolutely know that it is like as firm as can be, even though it's already going to do that. Like it's kind of like you buy the Porsche GT3 and you do want the ability to turn off all that traction control, even though you're going to go around the track slower. You still want that ability.
So along with this shock, something you're going to have to do is download the Ride Fox app, which is a new app they just designed to work with these Neo components, both the shock and the seat post. The app's really cool. It has so much stuff in it. To start with, you have to pair the shock on your bike to the sensors and also calibrate it on flat ground. This is all very easily explained in the app with little information icons that explain every step of this process, so it's very easy to do at home. Once you get all set up in the app, there's a lot of cool stuff. To start with, just some off-the-hand features. There are 2 modes you can choose between to toggle on and off. The first one is shake to wake, which basically means anytime the bike has movement, the shock will turn on and be in operational state. They recommend not having this on all the time because if you're traveling in a car, it's gonna keep waking up and drain the battery. So they recommend having that turned off most of the time, and you can just press the button here on the shock to turn the shock on and off. It's also very intuitive. You press it and a green circle spins around to show it's on, and then you hold it down and a red circle pops up which shows that it's turned off. So the other toggle you can turn on and off in the app is the LED bump indication. And what this does is basically anytime the shock feels a bump, the little green light on the battery side just flashes quick. And the main reason for this is just a nice feeling to know that the shock is definitely on. So before you drop into a run, you can just drop the bike quick, see it flash green, and you know you're good to go. So it's kind of just a confidence inspiring to know that it's turned on. So it's nice to have that. I have that turned on most of the time while using the shock. Again, it's going to drain the battery a little faster just because there's a light that's going to be flashing a lot while you're riding, but it doesn't eliminate it nearly as fast as like having it on while driving around, for example. So you can also, in the app, basically they have a garage, they call it, where you can upload your different bikes, and you can have multiple bikes with multiple Neo components all housed in the same app. What's also cool is that you don't need to have the app with you to ride the bike. So if you're one of those people that doesn't even bring your phone with you while you're riding, that's totally fine. The shock will still operate 100% without the app and having that connection to the app. When you get deeper into the app, there's basically 3 preset settings that you start with, which are open, standard, and firm. And these are referring to the compression tune of the electronic controlled damping system.
When we say tunes, it's very different from the traditional valve stacks or shim stacks. It's not anything to do with the actual physical internals of the shock. It's instead more to do with information that's taken and communicated within the system regarding bump threshold indicators, so how much G-force does it take to open your system, as well as open timers, meaning how long does the system stay open before it defaults back to firm.
And you can swap out tunes in the App Store or in their little app center where you can download. They have what's called a shore tune, which was developed on the North Shore of Canada, which is kind of a tune around really steep technical climbing. If you run it in the open tune, that's actually just the whole shock's open. It's not doing any controlled damping. But basically what's really cool too is if you go visit a friend somewhere that has this shock and they kind of design their own tune for their area, they can actually share that tune with you, and then you can apply it to your own bike. Because once you dive even deeper into the app, you can actually basically customize your tune, with kind of these scroll bars in the app to really dial in what the shock is behaving. And it's really cool to see and hear about what the pros have done with their tunes as well, which Fox says they may or may not share in the future to allow people to kind of get that insight into what the pros are running on their Neo shocks. So we were lucky enough this year to be invited up to test out this new suspension. We were up at Crankworx Whistler and Fox was hosting a test event there, so we got our hands on this stuff early. So we've been able to ride it and give it a good review for the last couple months. So kind of diving into electronic suspension, I think there's a misconception that electronic suspension is instantly going to feel better even fully open. And the truth of the matter is this electronic suspension is it's controlling the dampening of the shock, which is giving you better platform when you need it within milliseconds of reaction time. When it comes to its open, all-out performance, it's going to feel very similar to the standard Float X, which is a great shock. But it's not just because you put electronics in it that it's magically better in every aspect, even when it's fully open. It's still a standard shock. Now, diving into why the shock is so amazing, which we agree that it is.
Oh, this shock is sick.
Is truly that reaction time we've talked about a lot. That the shock basically, no matter where you're riding, any kind of loss of energy or momentum that you usually experience because your bike is, the rear end of your bike is compressing more during a G out or when you're sprinting up on the pedals. Pretty much any time that your bike could be more efficient, the shock is right there to make it as efficient as possible. And that's why the shock is designed for trail riding. It's designed for that kind of riding where you're doing a lot of undulating terrain, you're pedaling up a climb fast, you're descending, you're hitting a corner, you're rolling through rollers. It's not necessarily going to perform or be noticeable as much when you're just smashing down a steep rock garden. That's not really what the shock's designed for, but it is what it can totally handle that, but you're just not going to notice as much of a difference. But when you're doing your standard trail riding, that's when the shock really, is a huge difference and a very positive difference. So yeah, while we're up in Whistler, I was fortunate enough to ride both the air version and the coil version on my bike. First thing I noticed, like first lap, which again, like at a bike park like Whistler, again, you're not going to get as much of those like undulating climbs and stuff, obviously. But where I really noticed the shock was, again, just like pumping through rollers and G-outs and stuff like that, where your bike, the rear end of your bike usually kind of blows through its travel pretty fast. This shock just instantly is there to support you, while as soon as you turn the corner right into some crazy chunky stuff, it's fully open and feels amazing. And again, just that reaction time of it is incredibly fast. In the past, there's been other shocks that have had that kind of claim. And in my experience, they haven't performed very well. They weren't reactive enough, if you get the inside joke there. Whereas this shock truly does break away from its firm mode instantaneously to me. Like there wasn't any lag, there wasn't any getting caught up on square edge hits or anything like that. It truly was, you couldn't tell that it defaults to firm. So, if you have any disillusions about that being the issue of this shock, I would say you don't need to worry about that. It's something that I definitely was paying attention to because I've had experiences with shocks like this in the past, and I was definitely blown away at how fast this shock works and how that doesn't actually negatively affect the shock in any way whatsoever. So, thanks for sticking to the end of this video. I know it's a long one that had a ton of information in it, but we truly just really wanted to give these new shocks justice. We're very excited about these new shocks and all the technology jam-packed in this tight little package. Really think Fox nailed it on this. They took their time, they waited, they made sure everything was perfect before they came out with this final product. And we really think it shows. We think these things are really going to kind of shake up the industry and provide a whole new realm of performance that we haven't really seen, much before. So we're super excited about that. If you're interested in all this new tech, we just did a video on the transfer post as well, which is also wireless using the same protocol system. So check that out. And until we see you out there on the trails again, don't forget to keep pedaling.